So I want to take you back for a minute to early 2015.
Okay.
There was this video that surfaced online around that time. It was one of those grainy, handheld smartphone videos, the kind that just makes your stomach turn before you even fully process what you were looking at.
Right. I think I know the one you mean.
Yeah. It was footage from the outskirts of Mosul in Iraq, specifically the ancient site of Nimrud.
The capital of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. I mean, we were talking about a place that was basically the center of the known world back in the 9th century BC.
Exactly. And in this video, you see these men taking sledgehammers and jackhammers to these massive ancient stone statues.
Yeah.
There is this one specific moment that just burned itself into my brain. They are taking a power drill to a lamassu.
The winged bull.
Yeah, the bull of Nimrud. And if you haven't seen it, it's this colossal creature. It is part bull, part eagle, and it has a human head.
A massive guardian figure.
Right. And it had stood guard at those gates for nearly 3,000 years. I mean, think about that. It survived the fall of Assyria. It survived the Ottomans' 2 entire Gulf Wars.
And
then in this video, you just sit there and watch it get reduced to gravel in like 30 seconds. And then after that, they rig the whole archaeological site with barrels of explosives and just boom. Gone. A massive dust cloud just covers everything.
You know, it is so important to understand that it was a performance of destruction. They didn't just want to break the stone. They wanted to broadcast the absolute erasure of an entire culture. It was purely propaganda.
Totally. But here is where the story takes this really wild turn. Fast forward a few years from that video, that bull is actually back.
Sort of.
Right. Okay, physically, the original stone is dust. But restoration specialists didn't just throw up their hands and give up. They actually went through thousands of old photographs, like tourist snapshots, video footage from the 80s and 90s.
Basically crowdsourcing memories.
Exactly. And they used photogrammetry to build this perfect digital ghost of the statue. I mean, down to every crack, every eroded detail in the stone beard. And then they fed all that data into a massive industrial 3D printer.
And they printed a replica in fiberglass.
Yes, and it actually toured the Colosseum in Rome, and now it stands right outside the Museum of Basra in Iraq.
It is an incredible technological achievement.
It is, but looking at that, I really have to ask, is that actually heritage? Or is it just a really expensive piece of plastic modeling?
That is the multi-million-dollar question right there. And it's the exact friction point we are deep diving into today, because if you destroy the atom but you save the bit, does the culture actually survive?
All right.
We're looking at this foundational report today. It's titled Digital Cultural Heritage, Imagination, Innovation, and Opportunity. It was published by the British Council. And honestly, when I first opened this file, I totally expected a very dry academic list of museums scanning old clay pots.
And instead you got...
I got spy satellites, invisible forensic ink digital heists, and blockchain hair.
It is such a wild ride. So for everyone listening, the mission of this deep dive today is to figure out if technology is actually saving history, or if it is just creating a really high-tech digital graveyard.
And we are focusing on 4 specific countries from the report today: Egypt, Ethiopia, Iraq, and Kenya.
Which feels like a very deliberate choice by the authors.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Usually when we talk about digital heritage, the conversation immediately goes to the Louvre or the Smithsonian or the Met. But these 4 countries are where the stakes are literally life and death.
Yeah, they are dealing with massive post-conflict recovery, industrial-scale looting networks, and huge youth populations that are completely digital native. Before we get to the spy satellites, though, we need to agree on what we are even talking about, because digital cultural heritage sounds like a bit of a buzzword salad.
It really does. But the report actually breaks it down into 3 distinct mechanics, which is super helpful for us. First, you have digital tools.
The hardware, basically.
Right, the physical stuff.
Right.
The drones flying over the pyramids at Giza, the laser scanners, the smartphone sitting in your pocket right now.
Okay, and the second one is digitizing.
Digitizing is the verb. It is the act of taking a physical thing, a manuscript, a statue, a building, and converting it into pixels and code. This is exactly what they did with the Bull of Nimrud.
Right, turning the physical into the digital. And the third one is the one that I think trips people up the most. Digital born.
Yeah, this is the stuff that has absolutely no physical counterpart. Think about an NFT art project or a viral hashtag movement like Black Lives Matter.
Or a TikTok trend.
Exactly. If the servers go down, that culture doesn't leave a physical fossil in the ground. It just vanishes completely.
Okay, so we have the tools, the process, and the digital native stuff. Now, traditionally, heritage management has been pretty top-down. You know, you picture a curator in a tweed jacket in London or New York deciding what is historically important, putting it in a glass box, and writing a tiny little label for it.
The authorized heritage discourse, if you want the very academic term for it.
Yeah, that. But what we are seeing in these 4 countries is a complete inversion of that traditional power dynamic. It is moving from the institution down to the network.
The report quotes this amazing expert from Kenya on this, Chow Tayanamena. She talks about shifting curatorial power.
Which is really just a polite way of saying taking control back.
Exactly. When you digitize heritage, you don't need a massive brick-and-mortar building anymore. You don't need a security guard at a desk. You can distribute the history directly to the people. And we are seeing this massive shift from what we call the flat web, which is just scrolling through 2D pictures on a screen, to the spatial web.
Meaning virtual reality and augmented reality.
Right, actually experiencing the history in 3D space. But let us look at the landscape of these 4 countries first, because they aren't all doing the exact same thing with this tech.
Right. Iraq, for instance, is in a very specific situation.
Iraq is very much in recovery mode. The focus there is on reconstruction after decades of conflict. Now, they have decent internet penetration. It's about 75%, but there's a massive social divide.
The digital divide.
Yes. If you are a woman living in a rural area in Iraq, your access to this digital heritage is statistically tiny compared to a man living in Baghdad. So for Iraq, the technology is really about trying to stitch a wounded society back together while navigating those barriers.
And then you have Kenya, which the report calls the Silicon Savannah.
Which isn't just a catchy nickname, by the way. Kenya is a total anomaly. Their mobile penetration rate is over 130%.
Wait, pause. How do you have 130% penetration? Are people just walking around with 2 phones in their pockets?
Or 3. It is a phenomenon called multi-SIMming. You might have one SIM card specifically for cheap data, one for making calls, and another one for mobile money like M-Pesa.
Well, that makes sense.
And because connectivity is just so ubiquitous there, Kenya is actually leapfrogging traditional desktop computers entirely and going straight to mobile-first augmented reality. They are the true innovation hub in this space right now.
And then you look at Egypt.
Egypt is the giant in the room. You have the ancient monumental heritage, obviously the pyramids, the Sphinx, but you also have a local gaming market that is just exploding.
$1 billion in revenue projected.
Over $1 billion, yeah.
Yeah.
They are finding that the absolute best way to get a teenager to care about Ramses II is not handing them a dusty textbook, but putting him in a video game.
Which we will definitely get into. And finally, Ethiopia.
Ethiopia is playing a very different game. They are looking closely at the blockchain. They are intensely focused on data sovereignty, meaning keeping their cultural data inside their own physical borders and protecting intangible heritage, things you can't touch.
Okay, so let's get into the actual technology being deployed out there. You mentioned looting earlier when we talked about Iraq, and this is a staggering problem, right?
It's an industrial scale crisis, particularly in conflict zones, Iraq, Syria, Yemen.
Yeah.
When a government collapses or a war breaks out, the very first thing that happens is the museums and the archaeological sites get raided.
Because it's easy money.
It is. And it's not just opportunistic thieves digging a hole. It is organized international crime syndicates. They treat ancient antiquities exactly the same way they treat drugs or illegal arms.
So the obvious question is, how do you stop a guy with an AK-47 in a pickup truck using a laptop?
Well, you can't stop the guy in the truck. But you can make the object he's stealing completely radioactive.
Metaphorically speaking?
Metaphorically, yes.
And this is where smart water comes in.
Correct.
Now, I have heard of smart water being used in other ways, like police use it to tag copper wire on construction sites in the UK so people don't steal the plumbing. Or are we talking about the exact same stuff here?
It is the exact same underlying technology, but a totally different application. Smart water is basically a forensic liquid. It is a specially formulated solution that contains a totally unique chemical code.
Like a synthetic DNA signature?
Exactly like DNA.
Okay, but what does it look like?
It is completely invisible to the naked eye. And it is odorless. What they do is they take a tiny little dab of it and paint it onto a clay pot or a stone statue. And once it dries, it is incredibly difficult to remove. It is indelible.
So you can't just wash it off with a sponge and some soap?
Not at all. It gets deep into the micro cracks in the porous surface of the material.
Okay, but how does invisible ink actually stop the thief in the pickup truck?
It doesn't stop the thief. It stops the buyer.
Yeah.
That is the genius of it. Every single bottle of this liquid has a unique signature that is registered in a secure central database.
Oh, I see.
So let's play out a scenario. Say a museum in Baghdad tags an ancient vase. 6 months later, a terrorist group loots that museum. The vase gets smuggled through Turkey. maybe sits in a dark warehouse in Geneva for a year, and then finally ends up at a high-end auction house in London.
And the auction house does a check.
If they're legitimate, yes, they have to. They sweep the object with a specific frequency of UV light, and suddenly that invisible dab of smart water glows a bright, vibrant yellow-green.
Caught red-handed,
Yeah.
or green-handed, I guess.
Right. So they take a tiny sample, and we were talking about a speck the size of a grain of sand. They send it off to a lab, and the lab comes back and says this specific chemical chain belongs exclusively to the Mosul Museum shelf 4-row B.
Wow, so it completely destroys the... I didn't know it was stolen defense.
It entirely kills the plausible deniability of the art market. If an object glows, it is stolen, period. There is no debate. It makes the item completely unsellable on the white market, which instantly crashes its financial value.
That is brilliant. Did they actually deploy this, though, or is this just one of those cool pilot projects that lives in a white paper?
Oh no, they deployed it. The scale was massive. The project in Iraq successfully tagged 273,000 individual artifacts.
273,000. That is an unbelievable amount of painting.
It was an immense logistical operation. And this is actually where the human element of the tech comes into play. You can't just fly in a bunch of Western consultants to do this work indefinitely. They actually trained 43 Iraqi heritage professionals to do the tagging, the cataloging, the database management.
Building local capacity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Interestingly, a really significant number of those newly trained professionals were women.
Why is that significant in this specific context?
Well, historically, in the security and archaeology sectors in Iraq, it has been very male-dominated. This specific tech project actually opened a door for women to become the primary guardians of the forensic data. They are literally the ones managing the DNA of their own culture.
That is a great outcome. But there is a darker side to this tech, isn't there? I was reading the report, and it casually mentions something called smart water cannons, which sounds slightly terrifying.
Yeah, this is where the technology starts to drift into a slightly dystopian gray area. The tech exists to take this forensic liquid and pressurize it into a spray system, a cannon.
So you would literally spray the looters themselves.
Theoretically, yes. Imagine you have a highly sensitive archaeological site in the desert that is constantly being raided at night. You could rig the site to spray intruders with an invisible, indelible mist. And then, weeks or months later, if that specific person walks through a security checkpoint and a guard waves a UV wand over them, they glow.
That sounds incredibly risky ethically. You are physically tagging human beings like cattle.
It raises massive civil liberties questions. Because who controls that database? What happens if you accidentally spray an innocent goat herder who just wandered too close to the site? It fundamentally shifts the technology from protecting inanimate objects to actively surveilling human populations. The report is very clear about this. This technology is just a tool, but how you choose to use it depends entirely on your ethics.
Right. Speaking of surveillance, let's talk about the eye in the sky. Because they aren't just using invisible ink on the ground.
No, they're using satellites too. There is an NGO called Rashid International, and they're using high-resolution satellite imagery to actively monitor sites in Iraq from space. They're specifically looking for what they call looter holes.
What exactly does a looter hole look like from orbit?
It looks like Swiss cheese. If you look at an untouched archaeological mound, which is called a tell, the surface should be relatively smooth and uniform. But if you pull up a fresh satellite image, and the mound is suddenly pockmarked with hundreds of tiny dark circles, illegal digging is happening right now.
So they can catch them in the act.
Rarely in the act itself, because the satellite passes over at specific times. But they can map the spread of the destruction over time and redirect local police forces.
That makes sense.
However, there's another project happening in Benin that is taking a much more direct approach to tracking the smugglers. They're actually embedding tiny GPS trackers directly into elephant tusks to track ivory smuggling routes.
Into the tusk itself,
Yeah.
like they are drilling a hole in the ivory.
Yes, they are essentially creating a Judas tusk. You plant a GPS chip deep inside a piece of raw ivory, or sometimes a highly realistic fake tusk, and you intentionally let it get stolen by the poachers.
And then you just sit back and watch the dot move on a screen.
Exactly. It maps out the entire criminal network for you. It shows you exactly where they stop, where the secret warehouses are, which shipping ports they use to export it.
That honestly feels like something straight out of a James Bond movie.
It is highly effective for law enforcement. But again, the report mentions the friction here when applying it to heritage. Trackers need batteries. Batteries leak,
Oh no.
right? If you drill a hole into a 2,000-year-old wooden artifact to hide a GPS tracker, and a year later the battery acid leaks out, you have literally destroyed the exact thing you were trying to save.
So it is a huge trade-off. You might successfully map out the criminal network, but you sacrifice the object to do it.
Precisely. It is a very difficult calculation for museum directors.
Okay, so that is the defense side of things. That is how you try to stop the bleeding. But let's pivot and talk about the recovery, which is definitely the most controversial topic in the heritage world right now. Restitution.
The return of stolen goods.
Right, I mean, we all know the general situation. The British Museum, the Louvre, the Met in New York, they are absolutely packed with objects taken from Africa and the Middle East during the colonial era. The countries of origin want them back, and the Western museums are basically dragging their feet, to put it mildly.
The standard line you hear from the big institutions is that they're retaining the objects for the benefit of all humanity.
Right, of course. So enter this concept of digital restitution. The report highlights a fascinating project in Kenya regarding something called the Kamba Belt. Break the story down for me because it's wild.
So there's this group called the International Inventories Program, or IIP. Think of them as a massive global detective agency made up of historians and researchers. They have methodically identified over 32,000 Kenyan objects that are currently held in various Western institutions.
32,000 objects. That is a staggering number for just one country.
It really is. Now, one of these specific objects is a highly significant ceremonial belt belonging to the Kamba people. It is currently held in a European museum. The local community in Kenya desperately wanted it back. The museum was not sending it.
Surprise, surprise.
So a Kenyan researcher named Dennis Portillo and his team decided they were going to hack the system. They legally got access to the object in the European Museum. They did a highly detailed, high-resolution photogrammetry scan of the belt. And then they took all that digital data back home and used it to 3D print a perfect replica right there in Kenya.
Okay, I have to play the skeptic here for a second. If someone stole my car and then 10 years later they sent me a 3D printed plastic model of my car and said, "Here you go," I would be furious. Is this actually justice, or is this just a high-tech pacifier?
That is the exact criticism a lot of activists have. Digital restitution can absolutely be seen as a massive cop-out. It theoretically allows the wealthy museum to say, look, we gave you the open source data, we gave you the 3D file, stop asking for the original object.
Exactly. It feels like they are keeping the gold and giving back the plastic.
But, and this is really big, but the experts interviewed in the report argue that the reality on the ground is much more nuanced. Dennis Portillo and his team, they do not view the 3D replica as a replacement for the real thing. They view it as a conduit.
A conduit?
Yes, a tool for dialogue. When they brought that 3D printed belt into the room with the Kamba elders, the reaction was not anger or rejection. It was immediate recognition. They could physically hold it. They could trace the traditional patterns with their fingers. It allowed them to sit down and tell the stories associated with the belt to their grandchildren right then and there.
So it essentially keeps the software of the culture running, even if the original hardware is missing.
That is a perfect analogy. It actively fights against this concept of collection in absence. If an object is gone from its community for 100 years, the community eventually forgets what it means. The stories die. The replica bridges that gap and keeps the memory alive while they continue to fight the legal battle for the original.
That makes a lot of sense. But there's another group mentioned in the report taking a much more aggressive approach to this, Ludi.
Oh, I absolutely love the Ludi project. They openly call what they do a digital heist.
It is such a good name.
It really is. So the Ludi team, they physically go into these major Western museums. They buy a ticket and act like completely normal tourists. But they are carrying standard smartphones equipped with LiDAR scanners, which are just built into the newer iPhones now.
Yeah, anyone can use it.
Right. So they casually walk up to a stolen Benin bronze or the Rosetta Stone, and they slowly walk around it, scanning it from every single angle.
And the museum guards just think they are taking a really long panoramic selfie.
Exactly. Nobody stops them. So they capture all this incredibly precise spatial data. Then they go back to their studio, render a high-fidelity 3D model of the stolen artifact, and they mint it as an NFT, a non-fungible token on the blockchain.
Okay, wait. This brings up an absolute legal minefield. Does the British Museum technically own the copyright to the image of the stolen object they're holding?
That is exactly the gray area that Ludi is exploiting. Generally speaking, under copyright law, if an object is thousands of years old, the physical object itself has absolutely no copyright. It's public domain.
Right.
The museum might aggressively claim that they own the rights to their own professional photographs of the object, but if Ludi walks in and takes their own independent 3D scan, that is Ludi's data. The museum has no legal claim to it.
So they mint these 3D models as NFTs and they sell them.
They do sell them, but here is the absolute kicker of the project. 20% of every single sale goes directly into what they call the Ludi Fund. And that fund provides financial grants to young emerging African artists.
That is structurally brilliant. They are actively extracting financial value from the stolen object while it is literally still sitting in the glass case in London.
Yes, they call it digital provenance. They are essentially putting a flag in the ground and saying, you might possess the physical atoms in your museum, but we have reclaimed the ownership of the image and we are taking the value back. It completely bypasses the Western institution entirely.
And there is a real-world physical impact to this kind of crypto activism, right? It is not just crypto bros treating JPEGs. You mentioned the ballot NFT in the notes.
Yes, the ballot sculpture. This is a profound case study. The sculpture itself is this wooden carving that represents a Belgian colonial officer who was killed during a local revolt in the Congo back in 1931. The sculpture was made by the Pende people specifically to contain his angry spirit.
Wow. And where is it now?
It's currently locked in a case at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts in the U.S.
And I'm guessing the community wants it back.
They formally requested it, and the museum refused. So a local group called the Congolese Plantation Workers Art League decided to mint a highly detailed NFT of the sculpture. They put it up for auction and they sold it. And then they took the crypto they earned and they used it to buy back land.
Actual physical land.
Actual soil in the Congo. They are literally buying back their ancestral land from massive multinational corporations using the digital ghost of a stolen statue. That is, without a doubt, the most concrete, practical application of digital heritage I have ever seen. It transforms pixels directly into sovereign territory.
That is just wild. It completely moves the conversation away from asking, please give our stuff back, to just saying we are taking the value back ourselves and using it to rebuild.
Correct. And this reliance on blockchain tech isn't just for stolen art either. It is also being used in Ethiopia right now for something deeply personal and intangible: hair.
The Strong Hair Project. This part of the report was just fascinating.
Yeah, it's by a collective called Yatreda. They are led by an amazing artist named Kia Tedel. They created this series of mesmerizing slow-motion video portraits of traditional Ethiopian hairstyles.
Why focus on hair specifically?
Because in Ethiopia, hair is a complex social code. It is not just fashion. A specific braid pattern, or the way the hair is shaved, can tell you immediately if a woman is married, what specific tribe she belongs to, her exact age bracket, even her religion. It is a visual language.
But I imagine that language is fading.
Rapidly. As younger people move away from the rural villages to cities like Addis Ababa and adopts modern global styles, that visual language is dying out. The younger generation simply doesn't know how to read the braids anymore.
So you try to film them to preserve them, but why put them on the blockchain? Why not just upload these beautiful videos to Instagram or YouTube where millions of people can easily see them?
This is where the underlying philosophy of the technology gets really interesting. Kia Tedel makes a very specific and powerful point about Web 2 versus Web 3. If you upload your sacred cultural heritage to Instagram, which is Web 2, Instagram owns the traffic. They control the algorithm that decides who sees it. They run ads against your culture and they keep all the profit.
You are the free content and they are the digital landlord.
Right? You own nothing. But by minting these portraits as NFTs on the Ethereum blockchain, Web3 Yatreda retains the soil of the platform. They own the intellectual property rights completely. They own the permanent history of every single transaction. It fundamentally captures this Ethiopian concept of tizita.
Tizita, what does that translate to?
It roughly translates to nostalgia or a deep longing memory. But by using the blockchain, they anchor that fleeting nostalgia into a permanent, immutable digital ledger that nobody can ever alter or take down.
That is beautiful.
Yeah.
But we absolutely have to talk about the environmental cost here. Because whenever we bring up Ethereum or crypto, the immediate thought is the massive amount of energy it consumes. In countries that are already facing the brutal frownings of the climate crisis, isn't using blockchain kind of irresponsible?
It has been a huge concern, yes. The traditional proof-of-work model, where you have these massive warehouses full of computers just crunching meaningless numbers and burning coal to secure the network, is terrible for the planet. The report fully acknowledges this contradiction.
So how do they justify it?
Well, it notes that the underlying tech is rapidly shifting. The Ethereum network recently moved to a proof-of-stake mechanism, which overnight cut its energy usage by something like 99%.
Oh, wow. So the argument is that the environmental cost is plummeting while the sovereignty benefit remains high.
That is the hope, that moving forward, you can have absolute digital ownership without the massive carbon footprint.
Let's pivot to another technology buzzword that usually makes me roll my eyes a bit. AI, artificial intelligence.
Yeah, usually when we hear about AI in the news today, it is about ChatGPT writing bad poetry or deepfakes. But in the heritage sector, AI is basically functioning as a time machine.
You are talking about the qanats.
Yes, the qanats in the Kurdistan region of Iraq. These are ancient underground aqueducts. We are talking about massive tunnel systems dug entirely by hand thousands of years ago to transport water from the mountains down to the arid plains. They are absolute engineering marvels.
And they're disappearing, right?
They are being completely paved over. It is urban sprawl. If a developer builds a massive modern shopping mall directly on top of a 3,000-year-old fragile water tunnel, it collapses and destroys it forever. But the core problem for the heritage teams is that they literally don't know where most of these tunnels are because they are buried underground.
So how exactly does a modern AI help find a buried tunnel?
By looking deep into the past, researchers managed to gain access to declassified Corona satellite imagery.
Corona. Was that military?
It was a highly classified U.S. spy satellite program running during the height of the Cold War in the 1960s and 70s. These satellites would take photos from orbit and then physically drop canisters of raw film back down to Earth, where they were caught by military planes in midair.
That is so incredibly James Bond.
It really is. But the massive historical value of these specific photos is that they show the raw Iraqi landscape before the modern cities expanded and covered everything up with concrete. In the 1960s, you could still clearly see the subtle scars of the qanats right on the surface of the desert.
Scars, like the ventilation shafts.
Right. From space, the shafts look like tiny little donuts in the sand. Just a long, perfectly straight line of donuts stretching for miles across the desert.
Okay, so they took these old spy photos and they fed them into an AI.
Yes. They trained a deep learning model, specifically a convolutional neural network, to scan the images and recognize that one specific donut shape. They basically taught it to say, this is a qanat shaft, this is just a modern water well, and this is a bomb crater from a war.
And it worked.
Incredibly well. The AI was able to scan thousands of square kilometers of grainy black and white Cold War film in a fraction of the time a human could, and it successfully mapped the entire ancient water system.
That is incredible. It is taking literal Cold War espionage tech and repurposing it to save ancient irrigation.
And practically speaking, it allows archaeologists to go to modern city planners and say emphatically, do not dig a foundation here. There's an ancient tunnel right below you. It shifts the paradigm to proactive protection instead of just reacting to damage.
That is the best case scenario for AI. But AI is not always this neutral, perfectly helpful tool. The report dedicates a huge section to the problem of bias.
Massive bias. We always have to remember that an AI is only as smart as the exact data it was trained on. And right now, most of the internet, which serves as the primary training school for these AI models, is overwhelmingly in English, French, or Spanish. It is deeply Western-centric.
So if you try to use a standard off-the-shelf AI for African cultural heritage,
it fails spectacularly. It hallucinates completely false information. There are well-documented examples of AI image generators looking at deeply sacred African ceremonial robes and automatically tagging them in the system as costumes or fantasy wear because the AI simply doesn't recognize the cultural significance.
Or I imagine translation AI is failing completely on local languages.
Exactly. Translation models completely butchering languages like Yoruba or Amharic because they just don't have enough training data.
It essentially erases the culture because the machine literally doesn't have the vocabulary for it.
It is a modern form of digital colonization. If the AI running the future internet cannot understand you or accurately categorize you, you essentially do not exist in the digital future.
So how do we fix a machine that is fundamentally biased?
You build a new machine. There's a group mentioned in the report called Massacane. It is a massive grassroots collective. The name actually means we build together in Isizulu.
Oh, I love that.
It is hundreds of African researchers, data scientists, and linguists working actively to build natural language processing tools, NLP specifically for African languages, by African people.
So they are not waiting for Google to fix it. They are building their own data sets from scratch.
Exactly. They're feeding the AI the right cultural food. They are meticulously transloading historical archives, digitizing local books, ensuring that when the AI of the future encounters a complex Ethiopian historical text, it actually understands the deep nuance and the context, not just spitting out a clumsy, literal Google Translate version.
It is taking control of the dictionary before someone else writes it for you.
Precisely.
Okay, let's move from the back-end stuff, the code, the databases, the satellites, to the front end. What the average user actually interacts with? Immersion.
This is where we have to talk about gaming. And the statistics coming out of Egypt in the report are just mind-blowing.
Yeah, the report says the Egyptian gaming market is growing by like 8% a year, right?
It's huge.
Yeah.
The average Egyptian gamer plays nearly 9 hours a week, primarily on mobile devices. But the really big heritage story here revolves around a massive mainstream game called Assassin's Creed Origins.
Oh, I have actually played this one. It is set in Ptolemaic Egypt, right around 49 BC. And I have to say the graphics are insane. You can physically see the dust floating in the air, the incredibly detailed hieroglyphs on the temple walls.
It is a stunning digital environment. And Ubisoft, the developer who made it, did something highly unusual. They created a separate mode within the game called the Discovery Tour mode.
Which strips out all the standard video game stuff.
Right. No combat, no main plot, no quests, no enemies. It essentially turns the entire game world into a massive interactive virtual museum. You can just walk around and take a fully guided audio tour on how mummification worked, or how the farming irrigation systems function along the Nile, or explore the great library of Alexandria.
But, and I know I have to be the buzzkill historian here for a second, it is still ultimately a commercial video game. It is not a peer-reviewed documentary.
No, it is absolutely not. And actual historians have heavily critiqued it. They correctly point out that the game map is wildly condensed. In the game, you can literally run on foot from the city of Alexandria all the way to Memphis in about 10 minutes.
Which would take weeks in reality.
Right, the geography is totally warped to make the gameplay fun. The climbing mechanics are physically impossible. It is highly sanitized. It is a fantasy simulation of Egypt.
So the big question is, are we accidentally miseducating people? If a teenager plays this for 50 hours and walks away thinking this is exactly 100% how it was, is that actually dangerous for heritage?
It is a recognized risk. But the major counterargument from educators is the power of engagement. Look, that teenager was never, ever going to sit down and read a 500-page academic thesis on Ptolemaic irrigation techniques.
Obviously not.
But they will happily spend 50 hours completely immersed in this world. It creates a powerful feeling of presence and lived history that a static textbook simply cannot match. It sparks the initial curiosity that eventually leads them to read the actual textbook.
Yeah, I get that. But Assassin's Creed is made by Ubisoft, which is a massive French corporation. What about local creators telling their own digital stories?
That is the crucial missing piece. And for that, we go right back to Kenya. There is an incredible platform highlighted in the report called Meteor.
Meteor, how does it work?
Think of it as the Wix or the Squarespace, but for augmented reality.
Oh, like a totally visual drag-and-drop builder.
Exactly. It is a no-code platform. Previously, if you wanted to build an interactive AR tour of historical Nairobi, you needed to know complex coding languages like Unity or Unreal Engine. You had to hire incredibly expensive software developers.
Which completely prices out the local historians.
A massive financial barrier to entry, which meant only wealthy foreign NGOs or big tech companies could afford to build these spatial experiences. Meteor completely lowers that barrier. Now a local community leader, a student or a village elder, can literally drag and drop their own historical photos, their own recorded audio stories, and hit publish to create a world-class AR experience.
And they can actually make money from it too, right?
That is the core business model. The local creators get paid based on the views their AR experiences generate. It financially monetizes the heritage locally.
So instead of a French gaming company selling a digital fantasy of Africa, an actual Kenyan creator is selling the real story of Kenya.
It comes back to that central theme of ownership every single time. Owning the server, owning the narrative, and keeping the revenue in the community.
Let's touch on one last piece of technology that I found really moving: sound. Because obviously, as an audio medium, we deeply appreciate sound.
The Singing Wells Project in Kenya. This is such a beautiful and vital initiative.
What is their main goal?
Their mission is to physically save the music before it disappears forever. Eastern Africa has this incredibly rich, diverse tradition of tribal acoustic music. But as the older generation of elders passes away, the unwritten songs are literally vanishing into thin air. So the Singing Wells team decided to build fully mobile recording studios.
Like a studio packed into the back of a Land Rover.
Pretty much exactly that. They drive these rugged vehicles way out into the most remote rural villages, places totally off the electrical grid, and they set up professional high-quality microphones right there under the trees. They record the performances in situ.
In the village where the music belongs, not in some sterile soundproof room in London.
Right, and then they digitize it and put it up on platforms like SoundCloud and YouTube for the world to hear.
But the ethics here have to be heavily managed, because we have definitely seen this play out badly before, what some people call the Paul Simon effect, where a famous Western musician goes in, takes a highly unique local sound, puts it on a massive hip-hop record, makes millions, and the original village artist gets absolutely nothing. So how does the Singing Wells project avoid that kind of exploitation?
Through incredibly strict consent protocols, the performers explicitly retain all the legal copyright to their music. They receive a fair financial gratuity for the recording session itself. And most importantly, the high-quality digital audio files are immediately given back to the community on hard drives.
The report mentioned a very specific and emotional moment regarding what they called the repatriation of sound.
Yes. During their research, they actually found these very old, dusty, reel-to-reel audio recordings that had been taken by a British ethnomusicologist way back in the 1950s. They were just sitting in an archive. The Singing Wells team digitized those fragile tapes and brought the audio back to the original village and played it on huge speakers.
Oh, wow. What was the reaction from the village?
There is an incredible video of it online. You see these older men and women standing there, and suddenly they are listening to the singing voices of their own parents and grandparents, voices they hadn't heard in 50 or 60 years.
That gives me chills.
People just start spontaneously dancing. They start crying. It was such a profound moment that the video actually went massively viral across Kenya.
That is so powerful. It really shows that heritage isn't just about academically studying the past. It is about actively feeling it in the present.
It is entirely about human connection.
But, and we have to do this as we wrap up, we have to look at the hurdles. Because it is clearly not all happy dancing and perfect 3D prints. There are massive structural problems holding this all back.
The digital divide is incredibly real, and it is widening. And it is not just a simple matter of asking, do you have a Wi-Fi connection? It is about the physical hardware itself failing.
Yeah, the report specifically mentioned that the laptops are literally breaking down in the field.
Because Western technology is fundamentally designed to sit in a nice air-conditioned office in Silicon Valley. If you take a standard off-the-shelf laptop out to an active archaeological dig site in Upper Egypt, where it is 45 degrees Celsius and incredibly dusty, it just fries.
The thermal limits are pushed too far?
The batteries swell up, the screens glitch out, the motherboards melt. We're essentially trying to force very delicate square pegs into extreme round holes.
And there's the social divide, too. You mentioned much earlier that women in Iraq have significantly less access to this tech.
It is a severe ongoing issue. In many places, internet cafes or tech hubs are culturally male-only spaces. If a young woman wants to access this new digital heritage or learn to code, she might have to do it exclusively through her father's or her husband's smartphone while under constant supervision.
Which means the digitization process could actually end up reinforcing existing gender inequalities if the organizers aren't extremely careful.
Exactly. Technology is never culturally neutral.
And finally, we have to talk about the biggest overarching structural threat to all of this: data colonialism.
This is the invisible threat that keeps experts awake at night. If we successfully digitize all of Africa's incredible heritage, but the physical servers storing that data are owned by Amazon or Google, and the actual hard drives are sitting in a data center in Virginia or Frankfurt, is that really decolonized?
You have essentially just moved the stolen loot from a physical glass case in a museum to a corporate cloud server.
Exactly. You end up having to rent access to your own history from a foreign tech monopoly.
So is anyone out there actively fighting that dynamic?
Yes. The Ethiopian Heritage Digital Atlas is a perfect counterexample. This is a vital ongoing project that is meticulously mapping all the cultural damage resulting from the recent Tigray conflict using geographic information systems. But the absolute most important part of their entire spec sheet is where the data physically lives.
Let me guess, not in a data center in Virginia.
Absolutely not. It is entirely built, stewarded, and physically hosted by Addis Ababa University and the local authority for research.
So they own the metal.
They own the servers. They completely control who gets the login credentials to see the sensitive data. They control the narrative. That is what true digital sovereignty actually looks like in practice.
So bringing this all together, we started this whole conversation looking at the bowl of Nimrud getting destroyed.
the ghost in the fiberglass.
Right. And since then, we have talked about invisible forensic ink, digital heists in European museums, spy satellites finding ancient water tunnels, and teenagers learning history through video games. It really feels like we are standing at a massive turning point for human history.
We truly are. We are watching the real-time transition from a world where heritage was defined purely as physical objects locked behind glass to a world where heritage is dynamic data living on a network.
But I want to leave the listener today with that exact question we touched on at the very start. Think about the physical world right now. If the climate crisis continues to escalate and floods or fires wipe out these sites, if global conflicts continue to shatter ancient cities, if the physical Bull of Nimrod is gone forever, and eventually the only thing that remains is that digital file on a server, does the digital eventually become the real heritage?
It is a terrifying but necessary thought.
Yeah.
Are we just building a massive digital ark because we have subconsciously given up on saving the physical world?
And if that is true, what happens if the power ever goes out? Does our history just end?
That is the ultimate risk we are taking right now.
Well, on that intensely cheery note, that is all for today's deep dive. If you want to actually see the 3D prints you talked about, or look at the strong hair motion portraits, or see the satellite maps of the Knots, definitely check the show notes. The visuals are completely stunning and well worth your time.
Absolutely. Go look at the projects. They're incredible.
Thanks so much for listening. Stay curious.
1, 2